Pull up a chair. Yeah, you. Let me tell you something heavy. The air in here, it's thick. Thick with the smell of talcum powder and barbicide, sure. That's the smell of the work. But underneath that, it's the smell of secrets. It's the smell of stories. Every man that sits his behind down in this chair, he's not just here for a cut. He's here to unload. He's here to let go of a weight he's been carrying around on his shoulders all week, all month, sometimes his whole damn life. He leaves a little piece of his life behind in the clippings on the floor. At the end of the day, I sweep up the hair. But the stories, man, the stories, they stick to the walls. They sink into the worn out leather of these old chairs like oil. They get into the grain of the wood. And the fella who just walked out of here, the story he left behind, it ain't just a story. It's a testament. It's one for the ages. It's the kind of tale that reminds you that karma ain't just some spooky idea. It's a ledger. And sooner or later, everybody's debts get paid. He's a quiet brother. Always has been. Comes in every 4 weeks, regular as a heartbeat. Got that salt and pepper in his beard, cut close to the jaw. Lines around his eyes that ain't from laughing. They're the kind of lines you get from looking at the world straight on for a long, long time and not blinking once. The kind of lines etched by disappointment and resolve, one right after the other. Most days he don't say much. Just a firm nod when he comes in. His eyes already on the chair like it's a destination he's been walking toward all day. Sits down. Looks at his own reflection like he's taking inventory of the damage from the last 30 days. The usual, brother, is all he says. His voice low and steady, like rock settling at the bottom of a river. And I get to work. We have our conversation in the silence, in the hum of the clippers, in the shared understanding that sometimes the less said, the more that's understood. But today was different. There was a light in his eye I ain't never seen before. A pilot light that had been burning low for years, suddenly roaring to life. He had this little smile playing on his lips. Not a big toothy grin. It was something quieter, more contained, and a whole lot more dangerous. It was the kind of smile a man gets when he's holding a royal flush and the whole world thinks he's about to fold on a pair of deuces. He carried himself different, sat taller in the chair. The weariness that usually clung to him like a damp coat was gone. In its place was a stillness, a powerful calm that seemed to push out from him and fill the whole shop. And as I was finishing his lineup, getting that edge razor sharp with the straight blade, he looked at my reflection in the mirror. His eyes met mine, and he just said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, "You know, I ain't always been a man of means." And that's how it started. That one little sentence opened the floodgates. He unspooled a story so cold, so calculated, it made the straight razor in my hand feel warm. It's a story about disrespect, the deepest kind, the kind that doesn't just insult you, it tries to erase you. It's about what happens when you look at the man holding the mop and you forget he's still a man. You think he's just an object, a function, a piece of the scenery. You forget that a man's pride, it's a dangerous thing to step on. It's like stepping on a sleeping lion's tail just to see if it'll twitch. You might get away with it for a minute. You might even laugh about it with your friends. But that lion, he is going to wake up. And when he does, Lord, have mercy on your soul, because the lion sure as hell won't. This brother, let's call him James. He's about 50, maybe a touch older now. But this story starts a few years back when he was at the bottom. And when I say the bottom, I mean the cold, unforgiving concrete floor of it. See, James wasn't born to scrub toilets. Man, listen, this brother used to be a king in his own right, back when the internet was still the Wild West, back before everybody and their mama had a smartphone. He was one of them pioneers, a coder, not just a coder, a damn architect. He was building the digital roads we all drive on now before the pavement was even dry. He saw the future in lines of text that looked like gibberish to everybody else. He had his own software company, a small, tight team of about 15 people who respected him, not just as a boss, but as a mentor, a visionary. He knew all their names, their kids' names, their struggles. He had the big house in the suburbs with the wraparound porch, two decent cars in the garage, kids in private school. He was living the dream, the one they sell you on TV. He built it all from scratch, with nothing but the mind God gave him, and two hard-working hands that knew their way around a keyboard better than a pianist knows his ivories. But the world will test a man. It'll push you and prod you just to see what you're made of. For James, the test came like a tidal wave, a perfect storm of disaster, a bad partnership with a guy he thought was his friend, a financial wizard who turned out to be a damn snake, cooking the books to line his own pockets. Then a market crash that came out of nowhere, hitting his specific sector like a meteor. And the final blow, a betrayal from somebody he trusted with his whole life, his business partner who sold their proprietary code to a competitor just before everything went belly up. It all came apart at the seams, fast, like a house of cards in a hurricane. He lost the company. Then he lost the money trying to pay off the debts and the lawsuits. Then the big house with the manicured lawn. His wife, she was there for the richer part. She loved the view from the top of the mountain. She loved the charity galas, the vacations to Europe, the status. But she didn't sign up for the climb back up from the valley. He remembered the night it ended. They were standing in the cavernous, empty living room. All the fancy furniture had been sold. The only things left were boxes and the echoes of a life they used to live. She looked at him, not with sympathy, but with a kind of baffled disgust. "You lost it, James," she'd said, her voice sharp and brittle. "You lost your ambition, your fire. Look at you. You're just empty." He tried to tell her it was a setback, that he could rebuild. But she just shook her head. "I can't watch this. The kids can't watch this." She took the kids, told him he'd lost his ambition, and left him standing in the echoing silence of an empty house with a foreclosure notice taped to the front door. That's a hurt that don't heal quick. That's a wound that leaves a scar on your soul. To have the person who vowed to stand by you be the one who kicks you when you're down. That's a different kind of pain. He was broken. 50 years old with a resume that looked like a history book nobody wanted to read and a bank account that was screaming for mercy. That's a cold world, man. A real cold world. A man's worth in this society is so often tied to what he provides. And James couldn't provide nothing for nobody, least of all himself. So he did what a man's got to do to survive. He swallowed that pride. And let me tell you, that is a bitter pill. It's big and it's chalky, and it gets stuck in your throat on the way down. But he swallowed it. He took a job, the only job that would have him after months of unanswered applications and interviews, where they looked at his gray hairs and saw a liability, not experience. He became a night janitor. And the irony of it all, the universe's cruel little joke, was the location. He got a job at this new hotshot tech company downtown, Synergon Labs, or some nonsense like that. One of them places with beanbag chairs instead of real chairs, video games in the break room, and a fully stocked bar with craft beer on tap. A place full of kids, 20-somethings with expensive sneakers and cheap attitudes, calling themselves innovators and visionaries. They were playing in the sandbox that he had helped build. The man who helped build the very industry they were playing in was now the man who cleaned up their spilled kombucha and wiped down their sticky keyboards after they'd gone home. He'd come in every night at 9, just as they were starting to trickle out. This parade of skinny-jeaned, arrogant young men and women. They'd walk past him, their faces buried in their phones, their AirPods blasting some podcast about hustle culture. They didn't see him. He was invisible, a ghost in a gray jumpsuit. He wasn't a person. He was just part of the furniture, the part that cleans. And the disrespect, it wasn't loud, not at first. It wasn't in your face. It was worse. It was casual. It was the kind of deep, baked in disrespect that says, you are not even a person to me. You are a function, a tool. It was the way they'd leave their half eaten sushi boxes on $1 million conference table 4 feet from a trash can because they knew someone else would handle it. It was the way they'd spill coffee on the brand new white carpet and just walk away, not even breaking their conversation about their weekend plans, because they expected the magic cleaning fairy to make it disappear. James was the magic cleaning fairy. He told me about the little things that chipped away at him. One night, he was polishing the glass walls of a conference room. Inside, a young manager was grilling a junior employee, just tearing him to shreds over some minor mistake. The young employee was on the verge of tears. The manager was loud, vicious, and all the while, they acted like James wasn't even there, a foot away on the other side of the glass. He was just a fixture, like a lamppost. He heard things. He heard them talk about their stock options, their bonuses, their affairs. He was a confessor who never got to speak, a silent witness to their hubris and their folly. There were a few of them who were the worst. The managers, young cats no older than 30, who'd hit one lucky app and now walked around like they'd invented the air they were breathing. One of them, a fella named Kyle, he was the ringleader. Had that slicked back hair, that smug look on his face that just begged to be wiped off. He looked at James like he was gum on the bottom of his $1,000 shoe. James told me about this one night, a night that planted a seed. It was late. The office was quiet except for Kyle and his little team of disciples celebrating some project launch. They were loud, drinking the expensive whiskey from the company bar, acting like they'd just cured cancer. James was in the corner of the big open plan office, methodically emptying trash cans. Quiet, efficient, just doing his job, trying to be invisible. He could smell the whiskey on their breath from 20 feet away. Kyle and his boys are laughing, and one of them, trying to be funny, does this spin move and knocks over a whole 2-liter bottle of soda onto the floor, a sticky brown puddle spreading across the polished concrete. They all look at it. There's a moment of silence. And then Kyle. He doesn't sigh and look for paper towels. He doesn't say, "Excuse me, sir, could you help us with this?" He doesn't even acknowledge James as a human being worthy of a direct request. He just points at the mess with the toe of his expensive Italian shoe and says, loud enough for his friends to hear, and for the intended target to understand his place, "Hey, clean up crew, on the double." Then he turned back to his friends and smirked, like he'd just done something clever. James said he could feel their eyes on him, not with sympathy, not with embarrassment, with amusement. He was the punchline to a joke he wasn't supposed to understand. He just gave a slow nod, the movement feeling heavy and deliberate. He walked over to his cart, the squeak of the wheels echoing in the suddenly quiet space. He got the mop and the yellow bucket, and he started cleaning. The whole time, they're standing there, watching him, talking over him like he wasn't there, their voices full of that easy arrogance. The sound of the wet mop slapping against the floor was the only sound he made. He didn't look at them. He just focused on the floor, on the circular motion of the mop, turning their sticky mess back into a clean surface. But the worst one, the one that James said really burrowed into his soul and lit a fire, happened a few weeks later. It was Kyle again. Of course, it was Kyle. This time, James was cleaning the executive bathroom, the fancy one with the marble countertops and the waterfall sinks. It's late, maybe 1 a.m. The building is a tomb. He's on his hands and knees, scrubbing a scuff mark off the tile that wouldn't come up with the mop. The door swings open and Kyle walks in. He's on his phone, talking loud about some stock portfolio, trying to impress whoever was on the other end. He walks right up to the urinal next to where James is working, and he doesn't even pause his conversation. He does his business, zips up, and turns to the sink. He washes his hands meticulously, looks at his reflection in the mirror, fixes one of his perfect blonde hairs. James is still on the floor, right there, a man on his knees. And as Kyle is drying his hands and walking out, he glances down at James, a piece of lint to be brushed off his consciousness. And this is what he says, with a little chuckle in his voice, directed to the person on the phone but meant for James to hear. He says, "You're still here, old man. Don't you ever go home." "Old man," James told me, sitting right here in this chair, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a shout, that in that moment, something inside him shifted. It wasn't a loud crack. It was a quiet, cold click, like a camera lens snapping into perfect sharp focus. The hurt, the shame, the exhaustion. It all burned away in an instant and left behind something hard and pure as diamond. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. He saw Kyle not as a person, but as a symbol of the casual cruelty of the world, a symbol of this new generation that valued youth and noise over wisdom and quiet dignity, a world that saw a 50-year-old man on his knees, a man who had built and lost empires and saw nothing but a failure, a joke, an old man. He finished cleaning that bathroom. He made it spotless. He polished the chrome until he could see his own face in it. But as he was wringing out his rag over the slop sink, he looked at his own reflection in the murky water. He saw the gray in his hair. He saw the weariness in his eyes. And he made a decision. He wasn't going to get mad. He wasn't going to get even. He was going to get ahead. See, what these kids didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine in their wildest, most self-important dreams, is that the old man scrubbing their floors knew more about the guts of the computers they were using than their entire programming department put together. He was a master craftsman in a world of apprentices who thought they were masters. They had the speed. He had the knowledge. They had the arrogance. He had the scars to prove he'd earned his wisdom. So his strategy began. It wasn't a loud declaration of war. It was a quiet rebellion, waged in the dead of night when the kings of the castle were all asleep, after they had all gone home to their fancy condos, after the last echoes of their self-congratulatory laughter had faded. The building belonged to James. The hum of the servers in the cooled racks was the only sound. And in that silent cathedral of technology, James went to work. He'd finish his duties first, always, meticulously, every trash can emptied, every surface wiped down, every floor mopped to a shine. He was a professional. He did his job, and he did it well. But then, around 2 a.m., when the only other soul in the building was a security guard watching movies on his phone down in the lobby, his real work would start. He'd find an empty office, one of the fancy ones with a high-end powerful computer left unlocked. He'd sit down in an ergonomic chair that cost more than his monthly rent, and he'd wake the machine up. He was careful. Lord, he was careful. He was a ghost in the machine. He used guest logins, cleared his tracks every night, routed his activity through so many proxies and firewalls, it would take a government agency a month to find him. He was a phantom, and he started to code. The first few nights, he said it was like waking up a muscle he hadn't used in a decade. It was stiff. It was sore. His fingers felt clumsy on the keys, but the memory was there, buried deep. The old rhythms came back to him. The logic, the language, the steady rhythmic click-clack of the keyboard was a song only he could hear. It was the sound of him rebuilding his own damn kingdom, one single line of code at a time, in the heart of his enemy's fortress. He had an idea for a mobile app. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't a social media clone. It wasn't some game with cartoon animals. It was simple. It was elegant. It was an idea born from his own struggle, from his own experience. He called it Anchor. The idea was to create a financial tool for people like him, people in the gig economy, freelancers, or anyone with an unstable income. The app would allow users to input their bills and savings goals, and it would intelligently analyze their fluctuating income, automatically skimming small, painless amounts into separate digital envelopes for rent, utilities, and savings. It was a life raft, a financial anchor in the stormy sea of modern work. It solved a real problem for real people, the kind of problem these kids in their bubble of venture capital and stock options would never even think of. They were all trying to build the next $1 billion rocket ship to Mars. James was just building a better, stronger ladder for the people stuck on the ground. Night after night, this was his life. He'd push his cart through the silent, darkened halls, the smell of disinfectant sharp in the air, his body aching from the physical labor. Then he'd slip into a dark office, the glow of the monitor illuminating his face, his mind on fire, building his escape hatch. He ran on cheap coffee from the break room, sheer willpower, and a deep simmering desire to prove them all wrong. He wasn't just building an app, he was forging a weapon. He told me about the exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness that felt like it had settled into his marrow. There were nights he'd fall asleep at the keyboard, waking up an hour later with the imprint of the letter G on his cheek and a jolt of panic. He almost got caught once. He was deep in the code. The sun was about to come up, and he heard the elevator ding. An employee who'd been out all night celebrating her birthday was coming back to get her purse. He killed the monitor, dove under the desk, and held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. He laid there on the floor, smelling the dust bunnies and the faint scent of her perfume, until she left. He was living on the edge, in every sense of the word. He'd catch a couple hours of sleep on the bumpy bus ride home to his tiny empty apartment as the sun came up. Then he'd wake up, eat a can of soup, and do it all over again. This went on for months, almost a full year, a year of living a double life. The invisible janitor by night, the master architect in the dead of it. He was a ghost and a god in the same building at the same time. And then, one night, hunched over in the CFO's chair, it was done. The app was finished. He ran the final diagnostics. It was clean. It was perfect. He uploaded it to the app stores under a shell company name, Bedrock Digital. He didn't have $1 for marketing. He didn't have a launch party with champagne and DJs like Kyle and his crew did. He just put it out into the world. A message in a bottle, tossed into the digital ocean. And then he waited. For the first week, nothing. A few downloads, a couple of his old friends from back in the day who he'd emailed. Crickets. He kept going to work, kept cleaning the floors, kept hearing Kyle call him old man as he passed him in the hall, kept swallowing that pride. He was starting to think, maybe this was it. Maybe this was just his life now, a quiet man with a broken dream. And then it happened. Some tech blogger, somebody influential with 1 million followers, found the app. He wrote a small article about it. Not a big feature, just a short post. He called it a work of quiet genius. Said it was the most useful, elegantly designed app he'd downloaded all year. He praised its simplicity and its obvious empathy for its users. That one article was a single match, and that match hit a river of gasoline. The next day, Anchor had 1,000 downloads. The day after that, 10,000. By the end of the week, it was 100,000. It was spreading like a wildfire in a dry forest. People were talking about it on Twitter. It showed up on the morning news. It hit #1 on the App Store charts, blowing past all the big name games and social media apps. It went viral. And James is still going to work every night. He's still mopping floors. And he's walking past these same managers, Kyle and his crew. And now they're talking about his app. They're dissecting it in their meetings. They're projecting screenshots of his work onto the big screen in the conference room he cleans every night. They're wondering who this mysterious genius developer is who came out of nowhere. They're praising the elegant code, the simple user interface. Kyle, in a meeting James could overhear while wiping down the glass walls, apparently said, "This is the kind of lean, brilliant thinking we should be doing here. Whoever this guy is, he's a rock star. I want to hire him. Find him." And James is in the hallway, emptying a trash can, listening to them praise him while simultaneously ignoring his physical presence. He said it was the most surreal experience of his life. He was a king, and nobody in the castle even knew his name. He was a ghost they were hunting, and he was standing right behind them. The climax of that part of the story. The emails started coming in. Offers. Big tech giants. They all wanted to buy Anchor. First, it was $1,000,000. Then 5. Then 10. James is sitting in his tiny, cramped apartment before his shift, reading these life-changing emails on his busted old laptop, right before he puts on his gray jumpsuit to go clean toilets for the people trying to buy his creation. And then the big one came, an offer from a major corporation. A name you all know. The offer wasn't for 1 million or 10 or even 20. It was for $100 million. $100 million. James told me he just stared at the number on the screen for a long time. All those zeros. It didn't feel real. It looked like a typo. He closed the laptop, walked to the single window of his dingy apartment, and looked out at the city skyline. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He just took a deep breath. The first clean, clear, full breath he'd taken in years. It was the breath of a man who had just bought his own life back. Now, here's where the story gets good. Here's where it turns from a simple success story into a masterclass in karma. What would you do? You get a check for $100 million. You'd cash that check, walk into that office, find the smuggest looking manager you could, throw your mop at his head, and walk out with both middle fingers blazing in the air, right? You'd buy a Lamborghini and do donuts in the executive parking lot until the tires smoked. That's what most people would do. That's the movie version. But James is not most people. He had endured too much. The humiliation was too deep. A simple, "I quit," wouldn't balance the scales. He knew that quitting wasn't enough. Walking away with the money was a victory, sure. But it wasn't justice. Justice required a different kind of currency. Justice required a lesson to be taught, and for the students to be present for the lecture. He accepted the offer. The deal was done through lawyers. The money hit his account. A number so big it looked like a phone number. He was, overnight, one of the wealthiest men in the city. And he still put on his gray jumpsuit and went to work that night. And the next night. And the night after that. He kept his head down. He kept cleaning. Kyle and his boys were still there. Still arrogant. Still leaving their messes for him to clean up. In fact, they were celebrating a new round of funding, feeling more invincible than ever. They walked past James with their expensive shoes and their cheap manners, completely oblivious that the invisible man cleaning up their celebratory champagne spill could buy and sell them, their company, and the building they were in 10 times over. But James wasn't just mopping floors anymore. During the day, he was making phone calls, quiet phone calls to a team of shark-toothed lawyers, to investment bankers who spoke in hushed, serious tones, to the kind of people who move money around the world like chess pieces on a grand board. His plan was simple, and it was absolutely brutal. He wasn't going to quit his job. He was going to buy it. The company he worked for, this hotshot Synagogue Labs, was publicly traded. Its stock was available on the open market. So, through a series of anonymous shell corporations and third-party buyers with names that didn't trace back to him, James started buying. He started small. A few thousand shares here, a few thousand there, just a ripple in the market, nothing to raise alarms. But then the ripples got bigger. He started buying blocks, huge blocks of stock. The price started to creep up. The analysts on Wall Street were confused. Who was this mystery buyer, this whale, who was so aggressively and quietly acquiring shares in this mid-level tech company? The board of directors got nervous. The CEO, a man James had only ever seen from a distance, started making panicked calls. They had no idea who was coming for them. They were fighting a ghost. And James? He was in the break room, refilling the paper towel dispenser, listening to two vice presidents whisper in panicked tones. Our stock is up 20% in a week. Some hostile entity is trying to make a move, and we can't figure out who. Is it Oracle? Google? Who is it? And he'd just nod politely as they rushed past him. Evening, sirs. It took him 3 months. 3 months of mopping floors and moving millions, of cleaning toilets and orchestrating a corporate takeover, until one day his lead lawyer called him on his cheap burner phone, and he said the 3 words James had been waiting to hear. You have control. He had done it. He had quietly, methodically, and legally bought a 51% controlling stake in the company. He was the majority owner. He didn't just work there anymore. He owned it. The janitor was now the landlord. The old man was now the master of their universe. And now it was time for the lesson to begin. He told me he took 1 day off, the first day he'd missed in 2 years. He didn't spend it on a yacht or a private jet. He went to the most expensive men's store in the city, the kind of place where the suits don't have price tags. He walked in, and the slick salesman, not much older than Kyle, looked him up and down, saw his worn-out jeans, his old work boots, and he was about to dismiss him, point him to the door with a polite, condescending smile. But James looked him dead in the eye and said, his voice like gravel and steel, I need a suit, a Tom Ford suit, the kind a man wears when he's about to own the world. The salesman's professional smile faltered. Something in James's eyes told him this was not a man to be trifled with. An hour later, James walked out, leaving a stunned salesman behind. The next morning, James didn't show up at his usual 9 p.m. shift. He showed up at 9 a.m. He didn't come in through the service entrance in the back. He walked right through the main entrance, the big spinning glass doors. He wasn't wearing his gray jumpsuit. He was wearing that Tom Ford suit, tailored to perfection. A dark shark-skin gray that seemed to absorb the light in the room. A crisp white shirt. No tie. Shoes that cost more than the car he used to drive. He walked with a stillness, a purpose. He walked like he owned the place, because he did. The receptionist, a young woman who'd never given him more than a passing, indifferent glance, looked up from her magazine. Her eyes went wide. She saw this powerful, immaculately dressed man, but there was something familiar about his face. She couldn't place it. It was like seeing your mailman in a tuxedo. Good morning, James said, his voice calm and level. It was a voice she had never heard before. Not from him. My name is James. Please send a company-wide email. Mandatory all-hands meeting, main conference room, in 10 minutes. The receptionist was just stunned into silence. Who are you with? She finally stammered. James just smiled, a slow, cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm with me. He walked past her desk and onto the main office floor, and a hush fell, the usual morning buzz of keyboards and chatter. Just died. People looked up from their computers. They saw this stranger, this force of nature, walking through their office with an unnerving calm. He walked past the beanbag chairs where they napped, past the video game consoles, and he saw them, Kyle, and his two top lieutenants, a bro-ish fella named Chad and a woman named Jessica. They were standing by the artisanal coffee machine, laughing about something. They looked up, annoyed that their morning banter was interrupted. Kyle looked at James. There was a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He recognized the face, but he couldn't compute it. The face of the old man, the janitor, on the body of a CEO. It was like his brain short-circuited. The wires just wouldn't connect. James just held his gaze for a long second. Didn't say a word. He just walked right past them to the big glass conference room at the end of the floor, the CEO's conference room. He walked in, sat down at the head of the long polished table, and waited. The email went out. Subject: mandatory all hands meeting. Main conference room, now. Slowly, the entire company filed in. 200 people. They were confused, whispering. The CEO and the board of directors came in last, looking pale and scared. They knew what a hostile takeover felt like, and they saw James sitting at the head of the table, and they knew. Kyle and his crew filed in, still trying to look smug, but with a hint of confusion that was quickly turning to dread. They sat near the front, wanting to be seen. When everyone was settled, James stood up. The room was dead silent. He didn't introduce himself with a title. He didn't talk about stock prices or corporate synergy. He just looked out at the crowd of faces, and he started to speak. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled every inch of that room, heavy as a blanket. For the last 2 years, he began, his eyes scanning the room, I've had a unique perspective on this company. I've seen how it works from the ground up. I've seen the talent, and I've seen the waste. I've seen the good, and I've seen the ugly. He let that hang in the air for a moment. People were looking at each other, their faces a canvas of confusion. Who is this guy? Then he locked his eyes on Kyle. Kyle, he said. The name cut through the silence like a razor. Kyle sat up straight, his face a mask of pure bewilderment. Kyle, do you remember about a year ago? You and your team were celebrating a project launch. You spilled a full bottle of soda on the floor. You looked at the man who was cleaning the trash cans, and you pointed with your shoe, and you said, "Hey, cleanup crew, on the double." A collective gasp went through the room. Kyle's face went from white to a blotchy red, and back to white again. He was starting to understand. The blood drained from his face as the memory and the new reality crashed into him. James didn't let up. His eyes were like chips of ice. And do you remember the night you found that same man on his hands and knees scrubbing the bathroom floor? And you looked down on him, a man old enough to be your father, and you said with a laugh, "You're still here, old man? Don't you ever go home?" The whole room was frozen. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. Everyone was looking at Kyle. His smugness, his arrogance, it had all melted away. Now, there was just pure, naked panic in his eyes. He looked like a child who had just been caught. James looked from Kyle to the rest of the room. "That man," he said, his voice low and steady, "went home every morning to a small apartment, and he used the knowledge he'd gained over a 30-year career to build an application that this company, in its infinite wisdom, praised as a work of genius. An application that was just acquired for $100 million. Another wave of shock hit the room. Now they were all putting it together. The whispers were frantic. "That man," James continued, his voice dropping even lower, becoming even heavier, "took that money, and he bought this company. My name is James, and as of 9 o'clock this morning, I am the majority shareholder and the new chairman of the board. Silence. Just the sound of 200 people trying to breathe. Kyle opened his mouth, then closed it. No sound came out. This meeting is about a new direction, James said, his gaze sweeping over them all. It's about a new culture. And that culture starts with a simple, fundamental value. It's called respect. It's the idea that the person scrubbing the floor is just as important to our success as the person sitting in the corner office. Because you never, ever know who you're talking to. He looked back at Kyle, who looked like he was going to be physically sick. Kyle, James said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion, your services are no longer required. Please pack your personal belongings. Security will escort you out. He didn't stop there. He turned his gaze to Chad. Chad, I remember you leaving your greasy lunch containers on your desk, day after day, for me to clean up. You once told a colleague, loud enough for me to hear, that's what he's paid for. You're right, I was. But now, I'm paid to make decisions, and my decision is that your time here is done. You're fired. Chad sputtered. You're firing me over a sandwich box? James's gaze didn't waver. No. I'm firing you for the mindset that believes some people exist only to clean up after you. That mindset is a liability this company can no longer afford. Then he turned to Jessica, who had always just looked right through him, as if he were a pane of glass. Jessica, your sin was one of indifference. You saw the disrespect. You saw the arrogance. And you said nothing. You laughed at the jokes. You participated in it with your silence. In my company, silence in the face of ugliness is the same as endorsement. You're fired. One by one, he called them out. Not just them. Every manager, every team lead who he had personally witnessed treating another human being with casual cruelty. He had a memory like an elephant. He recounted specific instances. The spilled coffee that was never acknowledged. The condescending tone used to address the kitchen staff. The smirks and whispers. He dismantled their careers with the same methodical precision he used to use on their office filth. By the time he was done, a dozen people had been fired. The most arrogant, the most toxic, the loudest voices in the room. The room was now half empty. The people left were the ones who had always been kind, the quiet ones, the ones who had said thank you when he held a door or have a good night as they left. They were looking at James with a mixture of raw terror and profound awe. James looked at the remaining employees, his expression softening just a fraction. For the rest of you, he said, work starts now. We are going to build a company built on three things: innovation, hard work, and mutual respect. If you're not capable of all three, the door is right there. If you are, then welcome to the first day of the rest of your career. He turned without another word and walked out of the conference room, leaving a crater of stunned silence in his wake. Sound of a broom sweeping clippings across a tile floor, a soft rhythmic whisk-whisk. He finished his story right as I finished his cut. I wiped his neck with a hot towel, the steam rising in the quiet shop. He just looked at his own reflection in the mirror for a long moment. The lines around his eyes were still there, but they looked different now. They didn't look like scars anymore. They looked like victory maps. He stood up, pulled a crisp $100 bill from a money clip, and laid it on my station. Way more than he owed me. He just nodded, that same firm nod from before, but it meant something different now. Keep the change, brother, he said. And he walked out, the little bell on the door jingling his exit. I stood there for a minute, just looking at that empty chair, the leather still warm. It's a cold world. Facts. And sometimes, to survive it, you gotta be colder. Revenge is a dish best served cold, they say. But James, he didn't just serve it cold. He served it on a platter of their own making in a room they built at a table they paid for. He didn't just get even, he rebalanced the whole damn universe. It's a reminder, a hard one. Be careful who you look down on. Be careful whose presence you ignore. The person you step on today on your way up the ladder might just be the person who owns the whole damn ladder tomorrow. Never ever underestimate a quiet man, because while you're making all the noise, he's making all the moves. He's taking notes. He's biding his time, and his memory is long. God don't like ugly, and he damn sure ain't a fan of disrespect. You can write that down and cash it at the bank. Now, who's next?